Have you ever driven through interior Alaska at night? Not the parts on postcards. The real interior, where the highway thins into a gray ribbon and the wind scrapes across the tundra, like something alive. Out here, distances lie. A hill that looks an hour away will still be there at sundown. Sound behaves strangely, too. It carries farther than it should, except when you need it most. The land isn't empty. It only pretends to be. For the first few miles, it feels peaceful. White spruce leaning in quiet agreement. Snow drifting in soft veils. The hum of your engine the only heartbeat for 50 miles. But the deeper you go, the more the silence presses against the glass. It has weight. It has patience. And eventually, if you listen long enough, you begin to sense a truth everyone else is too scared to say. Something out here listens back. The locals say the interior has moods. Calm, watching, waiting, and on the wrong night, when the clouds sink low and even the wolves go silent, dangerous. If you've ever been near a place like this, let me know. And if you haven't, listen closely. My name is Trooper Elias Brannock. I serve as an Alaska State Trooper assigned to Yukon River District, a stretch of territory big enough to swallow entire states. I've been posted here for 9 years, long enough to learn that the map lies, radios fail when you need them most, and backup is usually a promise made by someone hundreds of miles away. We're understaffed. Always have been. In my district, it's one trooper for roughly 73 square miles of wilderness. Wilderness that doesn't care whether you're trained, armed, or even human. I used to think I understood this job. I was wrong, because some things I've seen out here aren't in any manual. They're not taught in training. They don't fit into any official report, no matter how many times I've tried to write them down. But I've learned something else, something far worse. Out here, in the interior, something learns your name first. The Yukon River looks different at night, wider, flatter, and far older than during the day, as though darkness strips it back to the version it remembers being 1,000 years ago. I've driven this stretch plenty of times, but tonight, as I turn off the main road and follow the narrow trail leading toward the trapline, the headlights dissolved into a wall of fog, so dense it felt deliberate. Fog like this doesn't form in these temperatures. It shouldn't cling to the banks. It shouldn't move like breath. But the interior likes to remind you that what should happen means nothing out here. Dispatch had called it routine. A local trapper named Dallin Pike hadn't checked in for 2 days. His cousin reported that Dallin's dogs had been heard howling far downstream, somewhere near the old burned-out fishing shack. Routine, they'd said. A welfare check. Probably a mechanical issue, a broken sled runner, maybe a twisted ankle. Nothing unusual. Except nothing stays routine this far from town. By the time I parked the patrol truck and stepped onto the frozen river, daylight was long gone. The sky had that strange violet tint it gets just before a storm, even though no storm was in the forecast. My breath fogged instantly, hanging in the air like it didn't want to leave. The silence came down next, thick, absolute, like someone had shoved cotton into the ears of the whole valley. My boots creaked on the snow crust as I walked toward the last known coordinates sent from Dallin's GPS collar. I should have heard the river groaning beneath the ice or the distant snap of branches settling under frost. Instead, the world felt paused, waiting. 50 yards out, the fog shifted, curling around my legs. I tugged my scarf higher, eyes scanning for movement. The beam from my flashlight felt weak, swallowed before it reached the tree line on the far bank. Then the temperature dropped. I don't mean a breeze rolled through or the night got a little sharper. I mean the air collapsed into cold, sudden, punishing, unnatural. The kind of cold that punches through layers like they're wet paper. I stopped walking and listened. Every instinct I had prickled awake. Fog doesn't behave like this. Cold doesn't behave like this. I thumbed the radio on my vest. Dispatch. This is Trooper Brannock. I'm approaching the site now. Visibility's low. Advise any updates on Pike's direction of travel. Static answered. Not unusual in the interior. The river valley eats signal. I tried again, adjusting the antenna. Dispatch copy. More static. This time with a strange dragging undertone, almost like someone sliding their hand across a wet surface. I lowered the radio slowly. Out here, when something feels wrong, it usually is I kept walking. A subtle shift in the fog revealed the shape before I reached it. A sled tipped onto its side, half buried in loose snow. 2 lead dogs crouched beside it, trembling so violently I could hear their teeth clicking. Their harnesses were still attached, tangles in a line showing they fought hard against something, panicked enough to twist themselves nearly to choking. "Easy," I murmured, approaching with open hands. The dogs didn't lunge or bark. They didn't even growl. They just stared past me toward the far bank, their bodies rigid with the kind of fear animals don't fake. Whatever had terrified them wasn't gone yet, not in their minds. No sign of Dallin. I crouched, running a hand gently along the nearest dog's neck. No injuries, no frostbite, just terror. That was when I heard it. Elias. The sound drifted lightly across the ice, almost playful. It came from the opposite bank, far too far for a human voice to carry clearly, yet it arrived sharp as a whisper against my ear. I froze. No one knew I was here. "Elias, come here." The voice wasn't loud. It wasn't even urgent. It had the tone of someone testing a word they'd heard for the first time, rolling it around, weighing it, learning how to use it. My hand hovered near my sidearm. I didn't draw, not yet. Shadows along the far tree line thickened as the fog receded, leaving long, unnatural shapes stretching toward the river. "Dallin," I called. "Nothing. Is anyone over there?" "Identify yourself." For a moment the silence returned, stretching thin and expectant. Then, softly, "Elias." Not shouted, not repeated, corrected, as though the voice had adjusted itself to match my own pronunciation. The dogs collapsed to their bellies and whined. Training teaches you to assess retreat, regroup. The interior sometimes requires a different kind of judgment, one based on a sinking feeling in your gut when the world stops behaving the way it's supposed to. I backed away from the river center, angling toward the sled. That was when my radio crackled. "Enoch! Elias! BR." The words weren't dispatched. They were distorted fragments of my name, stretched like something pulling too hard on a piece of cloth. I switched frequencies. Static followed. Another whisper brushed the back of my neck. Not from the far bank this time. From behind me. I spun around. No one stood there. Just the sled, the terrified dogs, and the wall of fog curling inward like a closing fist. The cold deepened again, pressing against my ribs. I keyed the radio one more time. "Dispatch! Emergency channel. I have possible contact with an unknown subject. Requesting immediate." The radio died. Not faded. Not fizzled. Died, like the battery had been ripped out. The fog parted slightly, revealing a trail beside the sled. Prints. Human. Barefoot. The toes had dug deep into the frost, each step deliberate, unhurried. Whoever, or whatever, made them wasn't suffering from exposure. The tracks angled away from the river and toward a stretch of untouched snow leading into a thicket of spruce. I followed them with my light. They didn't sink the way normal footprints should. The weight distribution was wrong. No shift from heel to toe, no stagger, no drag marks. Just 20 identical impressions, perfectly spaced, leading toward a patch of unbroken ground like the world had been reset ahead of them. The dogs whimpered again. I exhaled slowly, the vapor drifting like smoke from a blown-out candle. If Dallin had gone this way, he wasn't alone, and he wasn't leaving these prints. The fog swirled behind me, carrying the faintest echo. "Elias!" I clicked the safety strap off my holster and stepped toward the first footprint. Whatever waited beyond the tree line, the elders were right. The interior remembers things. And tonight, something on this river remembered me, and it wanted me to come closer. The footprints ended at the tree line, dissolving into snow, so clean it looked poured. No sign of Dallin. No sign of anything human. Just my breath curling out in frantic clouds in the distant crack of shifting ice. I stood there longer than I should have, searching for explanations that didn't exist. Eventually, training forced my feet back toward the truck. The dogs wouldn't stop trembling, even after I loaded them into the rear compartment. They never took their eyes off the tree line. By sunrise, I knew exactly where I needed to go. The village of Narek had no cell reception, and only one functioning satellite phone shared between 5 households, but it had something every trooper sooner or later learned to respect. Elders who remembered longer histories than our reports ever captured. I drove the snow machine across the frozen flats. Wind clawed at my goggles, the previous night replaying itself again and again, especially the voice. Too close, too exact, the kind of thing your mind insists on misinterpreting for your own sanity. But I had heard it, and the radio hadn't died on its own. By the time I reached Narek, smoke curled from the chimneys, and the sun hung low like a dying ember trapped behind thinning clouds. Children hurried inside as I approached. No one greeted me. That wasn't unusual. The interior meets strangers with silence, but today the silence felt weighted, like someone had told it to settle over the village before I arrived. I parked beside the community hall and stepped onto the packed snow. A woman in a heavy wool parka waited near the doorway. Her expression wasn't welcoming, but it wasn't hostile either. It was knowing. Trooper Brannock, she said without introducing herself. You're here because something called your name. The breath I intended to exhale caught halfway out. Who told you that? No one. She opened the door. But you wouldn't come otherwise. Inside, 3 elders sat cross-legged around a low table, drinking tea from chipped enamel cups. They regarded me with the calm of people who had seen many winters and weren't impressed by any of them. The woman gestured for me to sit, then settled near the stove. I removed my gloves and leaned forward. A trapper is missing. I need information that might help locate him. Anything you know about strange sightings, unusual behavior. One of the elders, a man with braided silver hair and eyes nearly white from age, raised a hand. You don't need to explain. We know what you're looking for. We know what found you. I hesitated. I never said anything found me. You did not need to. The second elder, a woman whose posture was straight as carved driftwood, set her cup down. You heard a voice. That is the first sign. I glanced at the medicine woman by the stove. She nodded, confirming what the elders already implied. We have a name for it, the elder woman continued. We call it Nillet Knockhead. The syllables rolled out like something older than language itself. It means the one who listens, the braided man said. The listener? I tried to keep my voice steady. What exactly is it? The oldest of the 3 elders, the one who hadn't spoken yet, leaned closer. His voice was barely above a whisper, something that learns a voice before it learns a face. The phrasing hit me like a cold gust. My mind replayed the riverbank, the footprints, the whisper that didn't belong to any human throat. I cleared my throat. Are you saying it imitates people? The medicine woman shook her head sharply. No, imitation is shallow. Birds imitate. Echoes imitate. This one does more. Her eyes locked onto mine with a seriousness that quieted the room. It doesn't imitate. It remembers. A chill climbed my spine. Remembers what? I asked. Your voice, she said. Your tone. Your breath. The shape of your name when you speak it. Once it has that, it only needs time. And patience is something it has always had. The braided elder took a long sip of tea. You must understand. Our stories are not warnings. They are instructions. If it calls you again after dark, you do not answer. That is the first rule. I folded my hands to hide the faint tremor running through them. What happens if someone does answer? The 3 elders exchanged glances, their silence heavy with history. Finally, the elder woman spoke. Those who answer do not come back unchanged. Some don't come back at all. I leaned forward. You've had disappearances? People who went missing under similar circumstances. We have had many, she said, and you have had them too. You simply do not write them down as what they are. I opened my mouth to object, but the words stalled on my tongue. Troopers disappear in the interior. Hunters vanish. Hikers leave campsites with boots still inside their tents. We write it off as weather, terrain, hypothermia, bad luck. But last night, that wasn't weather. You're a trapper, the braided elder murmured. Dallin Pike. He knows these grounds. He does not get lost. If he ran, he had reason. The medicine woman refilled her cup, her hand steady. Did you find signs? Tracks. My gaze drifted to floorboards. Barefoot prints. Human. No sign of cold injuries. Too precise. Too identical. The youngest elder closed his eyes briefly, as if hearing something distant. Then it is already learning him. Or you. I swallowed. Why me? You answered, he said simply. I never answered. I shot back. I didn't say a word. You did, the elder woman murmured. In your mind, in your hesitation, in your fear. The listener does not need a spoken invitation, only recognition. My pulse thudded in my ears. I forced a deep breath. Is there any way to stop it? To drive it off? The medicine woman studied me for a long, unsettling moment. You cannot drive off something that has no shape to chase. You can only avoid giving it more of yourself. Keep your lights. Keep your name close. And never, she leaned in, her voice lowering, never answer when you are called after dark. The stove crackled. Outside, wind scraped frost against the shutters. I broke the silence. If this thing's been around for so long, why hasn't anyone documented it? Why are there no clear cases? No evidence? All three elders smiled, not kindly, but knowingly. Because your people look for proof, the braided man said, and it does not leave proof. The medicine woman added, only absences. A hollowness settled in my chest. Everything in my training told me to categorize, rationalize, reduce the impossible into something procedural. But the image of those perfect footprints, the radio distortion, and the voice that had sounded exactly like someone trying to practice my name, my skepticism wavered. For the first time, the idea that something old and nameless might be walking the interior didn't feel like superstition. It felt like the only explanation that wasn't worse. The medicine woman rose and retrieved a small carved pendant from a shelf. It was shaped like a listening ear inside a circle. She placed it in my hand. This won't stop it, she said, but it may remind you that you are being watched. Sometimes remembering is enough to keep you alive. I slipped the pendant into my pocket, unsure whether it made me feel safer or more exposed. As I stood to leave, the braided elder spoke one last time. Trooper Brannock. If you find Dallin, do not call out to him unless you see his face. Voices are not always what they seem. Outside, the wind had shifted again. Dark clouds gathered over the river valley, forming a ceiling that looked ready to collapse. I fastened my parka and headed toward the snow machine. For the first time since joining the troopers, I didn't trust the daylight. And as I started the engine, a thought surfaced uninvited. What if the reason Dallin never made it home was because he answered a voice he thought was human? And what if I was next? I opened the throttle and sped toward the archives in town. Because if the elders were right, someone before me had already encountered this thing. And their unfinished reports might be the only warning I had left. The snow machine's engine hummed under me as I raced away from Narek. The pendant the medicine woman gave me pressing cold and unfamiliar against my chest. The wind cut to the valley with a keening edge, sending plumes of loose snow spiraling off the drifts like pale ghosts slipping between trees. I kept replaying her words. It remembers. The elders' expressions weren't fearful. They were resigned. People who'd spent their whole lives in the interior accepting that some dangers weren't meant to be understood, only survived. I didn't have that luxury. If I was going to find Dallin, if I was going to understand what stalked the river ice, I needed answers that weren't stories. That meant starting with the archives. By the time I returned to the station, the daylight was fading into that strange blue dimness where shadows lengthened too quickly. I shook off the cold and headed inside, nodding at Officer Neary on his way out. You look like hell, he said. Long night. That missing trapper? Yeah. He hesitated. You need backup? I considered it. The words never answer when you're called after dark lingered too clearly in my mind. The fewer people I dragged into this, the better. Not yet, I said. I'm just checking records. He shrugged and stepped into the cold. The door shut behind him, leaving me alone with a hum of fluorescent lights and the faint smell of burnt coffee drifting from a break room. The archive sat behind a locked door in the station's basement, a cramped, windowless room filled with filing cabinets older than most of the troopers stationed here. I keyed in the access code and stepped inside. The air was cool and slightly metallic, like dust clinging to steel. I headed straight for the historical incident reports, pulling the thick binder marked 1970 to 1995. Alaska's record-keeping before digitization was uneven at best, but small communities had a habit of preserving everything, especially the cases no one wanted to talk about. I set the binder on the table, opened it, and began scanning. Search and rescue, wildlife encounters, hypothermia cases, lost hikers, routine. Then a phrase caught my eye. Missing trooper, internal investigation suspended. The year, 1987. The region listed, Yukon River District. My district, my pulse quickened. The trooper's name was Daniel Haskett, age 34, for years of service. The summary was neat, concise, emotionless. Patrol unit located abandoned. No signs of struggle. Trooper last radio transmission incomplete. Presumed disappearance due to environmental exposure. But someone had underlined the last sentence in faint graphite. Twice. I flipped to the attached transcription of Haskett's final radio call. It was short. Only 2 lines made it through the static. It keeps saying my name, not my voice. The words punched through me with sickening clarity. Not my voice. The exact phrasing echoed what I heard on the river ice, except Haskett had lived it decades earlier. He hadn't been the first. I wasn't dealing with some new anomaly or freak wilderness phenomenon. This had happened before, and it had taken him. I scanned the sanitized report for more. It avoided speculation. It avoided detail. It avoided everything that mattered. Something about the omission felt deliberate. I leaned back, rubbed my eyes, then noticed faint smudges near the edges of the page. Not stains, but writing. Marginal notes. Someone had written them lightly, almost timidly, as though terrified to give the words weight. I angled the page under the fluorescent light. Not echo. Not human. Tracks don't match weight distribution. Footprints vanish into clear ground. He answered. I exhaled shakily. The elders had been right. About the answering, about the pattern, about the thing that wasn't imitation but remembrance. But my eyes caught one more scribble, nearly invisible near the binding. It learned him. A chill tightened through my chest. I kept flipping. More supplemental pages. More edits. More omissions. But then, tucked between 2 unrelated reports, a loose sheet fell out. It was a photocopy, grainy and aged, showing a crude hand-drawn symbol. A circle with a downward-pointing notch, almost like an ear carved into ice. I'd seen it before, carved into the pendant, and etched in stories older than troopers like me. Someone had handwritten a single word beneath it. Listener. My mouth went dry. This wasn't folklore. This wasn't village superstition. It was a documented case, erased, cleaned, and buried. I checked the folder for follow-up reports, search logs, field notes, missing person protocols. Nothing. Someone had purged nearly everything except the portions bland enough to pass for procedural. Why hide it? Why pretend Haskett simply vanished in the cold? Because if the troopers admitted something was stalking the interior, something they couldn't track, capture, or explain, panic would spread faster than the winter storms. Travel would halt. Villages would evacuate. And any trooper responding to a call after dark would question every whisper drifting through the trees. I set the photocopy aside, fingers trembling slightly. The next page held an evidence card. It listed an item found near Haskett's last known location, frost markings on vehicle windshield. Under description, someone had typed the words, likely caused by environmental factors, but handwritten beneath it, in the same faint pencil, same symbol as above. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I closed the binder carefully, checked inside the cover, and found something taped there, something I might have missed if I hadn't run my fingertips across the page. A small envelope. No label. I opened it. Inside lay a single photograph, faded but clear enough. A patrol truck sat half buried in snow, windshield crusted with frost. And drawn into that frost, etched with deliberate pressure, was the same circular symbol. Someone had documented it. Someone had seen it. Someone had tried to warn the next trooper who'd patrol this district. Me, my stomach twisted. The archive suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were inching closer. I packed the binder, photocopy, and photographed back into the folder exactly as I found them, not out of respect for procedure, but because something instinctual insisted on it. If Haskett had encountered this thing, and I'd seen traces too, then the pattern wasn't random. Whatever walked the riverbank hadn't drifted into the Yukon by accident. It had been here for decades, maybe longer, and it remembered names. My name. I flicked off the archive light and headed upstairs, replaying every whisper I'd heard over the ice, the radio static curling itself into syllables that didn't belong in the living world. Outside the station, the daylight had bled away completely. Night descended fast in the interior, swallowing rooftops and trees, until only the faint glow of sodium streetlights held the dark at bay. My boots crunched across the parking lot, each step echoing far too loudly in the stillness. I reached my truck, stopped, because someone or something had wiped away part of the frost on the windshield. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary patch cleared by a gloved hand. But then I saw the shape. A circle, a downward notch. The same symbol from the archives, drawn into the thin veil of frost with unnerving precision. Not random, not accidental. A signature. Cold pressed hard against my ribs, as though the night itself was leaning in to listen. The medicine woman's warning echoed through my skull. It remembers. And now, standing inches from the symbol carved on my windshield, I understood with sinking clarity. It reminded me, far out in the darkness, something creaked, a long, low sound like weight shifting against ice. I didn't look toward it. I couldn't. Instead, I slid into the truck, locked the doors, and forced my shaking hands around the steering wheel. Whatever had marked my truck wasn't done, and it wasn't waiting for daylight. I drove through the deepening dark with the symbol still burning behind my eyes. Each mile of empty road felt heavier than the last, as though something unseen paced alongside the truck, matching my speed step for step. The windshield eventually frosted again, but the symbol beneath it stayed visible far longer than it should have, as if the cold itself refused to reclaim the space it had taken. Dispatch called as I neared the junction, leading toward the river outpost. "Brannock, the weather's kicking up," Neary said. "Are you planning to come back into town?" I glanced at the sky, low clouds pressing down like the lid of a coffin. "Negative. I'm heading to Outpost Heron. VPSO's Burrow and Lake are doing checks there. I'll bunk for the night." "Copy," Neary said. A pause. "You call if anything feels off." Everything felt off, but I didn't say it. Outpost Heron sat on a rise overlooking a frozen inlet, a squat wooden cabin with a small tower and a steel rack holding fuel cans. Most troopers passed through it at some point. No one stayed longer than necessary. The generator rattled constantly, sounding like it had one foot in the grave at all times. I parked the truck, the engine ticking as it cooled. As soon as I stepped into the cold, a prickling sensation crawled across the back of my neck. The pines on the far ridge were still, too still. Even when the air is dead, branches shift. These didn't. The cabin door opened, spilling yellow light onto the snow. VPSO Burrow waved from inside. "You look like you drove through hell," he said. "Feels about right." I answered, stepping in. VPSO Lake sat at the table cleaning a rifle, her expression sharp and assessing. "We heard you had a missing trapper." "Yeah, and something else." She raised an eyebrow. Something like, "What?" The word stuck in my throat. It keeps saying my name. Instead, I said, "Track strange ones." Lake didn't press. Burrow gestured toward the back room. "We got a cot free. Generator's been acting up again, so lights might flicker." I glanced at the humming unit outside through the small window. The steady rumble had a strange cadence to it tonight, as if the machine were struggling to mimic something rhythmic. We passed the next hour in uneasy conversation. I avoided mentioning the voice. I wasn't ready to see how they'd react. Night tightened around the outpost. the wind picking up until it hissed along the shingles like someone dragging fingernails across the roof. Then, as suddenly as someone flipping a switch, the generator died. The lights cut out. Silence flooded the cabin, thick, instant, suffocating. Lake cursed softly and stood. Burrow grabbed the backup lamp. "I'll check." "Wait," I said, because something outside had just shifted. Not the wind, not the snow, something else. We all held still. In that buried, unnatural quiet, a sound drifted from the tree-line beyond the outpost. Elias... Lake's hand went to her rifle. Burrow swallowed hard. "Who's out there?" "Don't answer." I whispered. The elders' voices echoed sharply in my head. "Never answer when you're called after dark." The whisper came again, closer this time. Too close. "Elias." Drawn out, testing the consonants, molding them. Burrow's composure cracked. "That's a person. Has to be." He moved toward the door. "It's not," I said, stepping in front of him. "Stay inside." Another whisper curled around the cabin walls, slithering like breath against glass. "Elias, come here." Lake's face drained of color. No human voice carries that clear from that distance. I grabbed my radio. Outpost Heron requesting backup. Possible. Static exploded through the speaker, harsh and warbling, twisting into a tone that made the fine hairs on my arms rise. Then the radio spoke. Not in any language. It spoke my name. In a perfect replica of the whisper. Burrow lost it. He threw open the door, stepped onto porch, and fired a round into the dark. The gunshot cracked across the frozen inlet, echoing so violently the trees trembled. Snow sifted down from their branches like shaken dust. No scream, no footsteps, no retreat, just silence. Then something new, a soft, rhythmic crunching. Footsteps circling the cabin. Lake motioned for Burrow to get back inside. He slammed the door and bolted it, breathing hard. "Tell me that's a wolf," he whispered. I didn't answer. I already knew the truth. Because the footsteps weren't erratic or clumsy like an animal. They were evenly spaced, slow, deliberate, human. Lake swept her flashlight beam across the frozen ground through the window. The light caught a footprint, a bare footprint, then another and another. But every single one was identical to the ones I'd seen by the river. Same depth, same shape, same impossibly perfect spacing. One bare foot, repeated, as though the walker had only one true limb, and the rest were something else entirely. Burrow backed away from the door. "No, no, no." The footsteps circled again. The whisper threaded through the walls. "Elias." Lake steadied her rifle. "It's not coming in. Nothing's coming in." But her voice trembled. The generator suddenly coughed back to life. A violent burst of sound shook the cabin. Lights flicker overhead, sputtering, dimming, then flaring bright. Too bright. The shadows on the walls stretched unnaturally long, bending in angles that didn't match the room's geometry. Burrow shouted, "What the hell?" The lights strobed faster. The whisper stopped. So did the footsteps. Lake turned toward the door. "Burrow, stay close. Do not open that again." She looked behind her. Burrow wasn't there. At first I thought he'd crouched or moved behind the table. But the space was empty. His coat still hung on its hook. His boots still sat by the door. He had vanished between breaths. No sound. No footsteps. No cry for help. Just gone. Lake's face twisted into raw fear. "Burrow, Burrow, answer me." "Don't call out," I said sharply. But she was already shouting his name. Outside, something moved in response. Slow, heavy, like weight redistributing itself across ice. Lake clamped a hand over her mouth. The generator roared suddenly, louder than it should have been capable of, and every light in the outpost surged, bathing the room in stark white. Then darkness crashed down again. Silence, not even breathing. Until I realized the only breath I heard was my own. "Elias." That whisper came from the porch, inches beyond the door. Lake raised her rifle, barrel shaking. "We can't stay here," she whispered. "It took him. It took Burrow." I swallowed, forcing my thoughts into something resembling order. Pack only what you need. We leave through the back. We stay in the light as long as we can. The generator's dying. I know. As if to confirm, the machine outside wheezed, sputtered, and finally choked out its last vibration. The cabin plunged into total black. Lake clicked on the backup lamp, but the beam only cut a small, trembling cone into the darkness. The whisper came again, softer, intimate, as if leaning right beside my ear. Elias? Lake's breath hitched. We need to move, I said, because the thing outside wasn't testing anymore. It was hunting. And the next name it whispered wouldn't be mine, it would be hers. We left Outpost Heron through the back door, moving fast but controlled, Lake clutching the backup lamp like it was the last flame on Earth. The snow swallowed our footsteps as soon as we made them. The night pressed tight around us, as if listening. Burrow was gone, taken, erased. The generator incident, because that's how it now lived in my mind, played in loops behind my eyes. The light strobing, the whisper curling from porch, the single bare footprints appearing where no living body could have stood. What chilled me most wasn't Burrow's disappearance, or even the voice. It was how calculated the silence afterward had been, as if the thing wanted us to hear the absence. Lake and I made it to my truck without incident. I kept my eyes fixed on the tree lean, scanning for movement, watching for any sign of the symbol returning. Nothing. No prints. No whisper. Sometimes the worst danger in the interior is when everything goes quiet. Lake climbed in, clutching her rifle. Her breathing hitched with every shift of the wind. "Where do we go?" she asked. I started the engine. Somewhere with more people. It hesitates around groups. Because it can't imitate multiple voices? I didn't answer. I didn't know. And that was worse. We drove through the dark for nearly an hour before the first hint of dawn brushed the horizon. When I finally saw the distant glow of the station lights, Lake sagged back in her seat as if she'd been holding her breath the entire drive. Inside, Neary was waiting, half asleep and wide-eyed when he saw us. "You look like hell," he said again, but this time there was no humor behind it. "Where's Burrow?" Lake stared at the floor. "He's missing," I said. "Taken." Taken by what? That was the question, wasn't it? But naming a thing gives it legitimacy, and legitimacy makes it harder to ignore. I wasn't ready to cross that line with Neary. Not yet. "Just missing," I said. "We need a team out there when it's fully light." Neary nodded slowly. "I'll notify dispatch." Lake went to break room, trembling so hard the doorframe shook under her grip. I sat at my desk, numb and hollow, the events of the night stacking themselves into a single, suffocating realization. No one is trained for this. I opened my field notebook and wrote at the top of a clean page, "Unofficial field rules, do not share." My handwriting wavered, but the words steadied something inside me. Rule 1, never answer when called after dark. The elders had been right. The listener, whatever it was, drew closer when you responded. Recognition was enough. Acknowledgement fed it. Rule 2, if you hear your own voice behind you, walk, do not run. Predators chase what flees. Humans flee instinctively, and the listener mimicked rhythm, cadence, and tone well enough that panic would only lead someone into its arms. Walking kept your mind steady. Walking kept you alive. Rule 3, lights make it hesitate, but not stop. The generator's frantic resurgence had given us seconds, not safety. Light had forced the shadows back, but hadn't banished them. Nothing had banished them. It had only observed, paused, learned. I added another. Rule 4, it learns faster when acknowledged. Burrow shouted. Lake responded. I nearly did. Each time, it grew more exact. I kept writing, rule after rule forming themselves from instinct, from fear, from memory. The cases that hadn't made sense before, the vanished hikers whose boots were left behind, the radio calls with distorted speech, the footprints that search teams dismissed as misidentification, fell into place. Flashbacks came sharp and unwelcome. 2 winters ago, a hunter reported hearing his own dog barking from the opposite ridge, even though the animal was beside him. Last spring, a fisherman claiming his wife called to him from across the inlet while she slept inside their cabin. Last month, hikers describing hearing their guide shouting instructions even though he'd been silent. We dismissed these as stress, isolation, echo anomalies. We were wrong. Those weren't isolated cases. They were scouting behavior, a pattern, a cycle, something learning in intervals. And then something hit me harder than every rule combined. The footprints. Identical spacing, identical depth, identical orientation. Animals leave variation. Humans leave imbalance. Terrain alters both. But these prints behave like a stamp, consistent, perfect, unemotional. No, creature survives in the interior barefoot. Not for minutes. Not in these temperatures. Whatever was out, there wasn't walking. It was mimicking walking, as if movement to it was a role, not a necessity. My stomach twisted. I added another line. Rule 5. There may be more than one. Because Burrow had disappeared while my voice was whispered at the door. The river incident, the outpost event, the old archive case. None overlapped geographically. The interior was vast. Too vast for one creature to cover. Unless it wasn't one creature at all. Or worse, one creature capable of appearing in more than one place. Lake returned, pale but composed. Dispatch wants your statement. I nodded. Tell them I need 10 minutes. She left again. My radio buzzed. I straightened. It buzzed a second time. Then a third, soft, hesitant. Like whoever was called was unsure of the channel. Finally, Trooper Brannock, this is dispatch. Do you copy? Relief washed briefly through me. Copy. We've got a situation, the dispatcher said, voice trembling. Another village called in. They've got a child saying something's outside their home. My grip tightened on the radio. What kind of something? She claims it's practicing her father's voice. The words felt like a punch. What village? I demanded. Ravik. They're requesting immediate assistance. Ravik was isolated. Too isolated. Only accessible by snow machine or aircraft. And aircraft wouldn't fly in the current weather. How old is a child? I asked. 7. 7. Old enough to fear the dark. Young enough to believe that voices could come from anywhere. Did she answer it? I asked, pulse hammering. We don't know, dispatch replied. Her mother said the voice kept getting clearer. Closer. I grabbed my coat and pushed up from the desk. Lake hurried back toward me. What's happening? New call, I said. Ravik. Something's outside of home. A child says it's practicing her father's voice. Lake's jaw clenched. You think it's the same thing? I didn't answer, because deep down I knew the truth. It wasn't the same one. It was another, and it was learning faster. I zipped my coat, holstered my sidearm, and headed for the door. Before stepping outside, I glanced back at the notebook on my desk. The rules stared up at me, stark and incomplete. There would be more. There had to be, because the creature or creatures were evolving, learning, adapting. As I stepped outside into the freezing air, one thought anchored itself in my mind. If a thing could learn a voice, what would stop it from learning a face next? And if it did, would anyone be able to tell the difference? I climbed into the truck, started the engine, and sped toward Ravik as the early light crept over the horizon like a warning arriving too late. The drive to Ravik was the kind that ages a trooper. The storm rolled in faster than predicted, swallowing the road in white sheets that hammered the windshield like fists of ice. The wipers fought a losing battle, scraping across frozen glass with every pass. Snowdrifts rose like walls on either side, narrowing the world to a shifting tunnel. The blizzard didn't just hide distance, it erased it. Wind clawed at the truck, howling across the hood like something furious and hungry. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other hovering near the radio. Every so often I'd hear a crackle, as though someone were about to speak, only for the line to dissolve into static. My name never formed, but the pauses felt intentional, like something listening for the right moment to try. By the time I reached the outskirts of Ravik, the village looked half swallowed by the storm. Lights glowed faintly behind swirling curtains of snow. Shapes of houses appeared and vanished like mirages. I parked near the only occupied home showing signs of activity. Lanterns lit in every window, shadows pacing behind them. A woman flung the front door open before I even killed the engine. "Trooper, hurry!" I sprinted through the drifts, pulled inside, and slammed the door behind me. The warmth hit me like a slap, but the tension inside the house froze everything else. The mother was pale, shaking, gripping a blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. In the corner sat a little girl, no more than 7, wrapped in a quilt with fox patterns stitched across it. Her dark eyes were wide and fixed on the door. "She won't speak," the mother whispered. "Not since it happened." I crouched beside the girl. "Hey there, I'm Elias. You safe now?" Her lips trembled. She didn't look at me. She kept staring at the door. I softened my voice. "Your mom says someone came earlier. Someone calling for you." A tiny nod. I swallowed. Was it outside, or did it sound like it was closer? The girl raised one shaking hand and pointed at the doorframe. My skin tightened. "Right there." Another nod. The mother stepped forward. It was saying her name, over and over. Then it changed. It sounded like her father, begging her to unlock the door. I turned toward her. "Where's her father now?" "Anchorage," she said, voice cracking. "His flight left this afternoon. He won't be back until next week." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The girl finally spoke, barely audible. It got the laugh wrong. Her mother flinched. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. The girl finally looked at me. Daddy laughs at the end of the sentences, when he's trying to sound calm. Tears welled in her eyes. The one outside tried to do it too. Tried, not succeeded. "Not yet." I stood, moving to the window. The storm masked everything beyond it. No shapes, no tracks, no motion. Just white oblivion. "Show me where it stood," I said. The mother led me outside into the storm, lantern in hand. The wind tore at our coats immediately. Snow stung my face like needles. She pointed to the porch. "Right there." It kept tapping. I crouched low, examining the ground. Fresh snowfall had filled most of the surface, but not all of it. Beneath a thin layer of snow, shapes pressed faintly into the planks. Bare footprints. Identical. Perfectly spaced. I brushed the snow aside, heart beating hard. The prints circled the doorframe, pacing, waiting, testing, trying to handle. I ran my fingers along the wood beside the doorknob. Scratches, deep ones, not from claws, not from tools, from fingers. Long, thin streaks carved downward with deliberate pressure, as if something had rested its hand there, learning how to knock. Wind ripped across the porch, nearly snuffing the lantern. For an instant, I thought I heard something beneath the gale, a breath that did not belong. We retreated inside. "Lock everything," I said, "and keep the lights on." The mother nodded and hurried away. The girl watched me with a fear too old for her age. "It knew Daddy's words," she whispered, "but not his breath." Her phrasing made my blood run colder than the blizzard. I sat beside her again. "What did it say?" She hesitated, then whispered. "Sweet Pea, open the door." Her voice cracked, but she forced the next words. It kept saying it, slower each time, like it was trying to get it right. The room tilted slightly as the realization hit. The listener didn't just repeat voices. It practiced them, refined them, perfected them. And if it could practice a stranger's father, how long until it perfected mine? I forced myself to stand. "I'm going outside again." "Stay with your mother." The girl reached out and caught my sleeve. Her hand was freezing. "Don't answer it if it calls you." I almost told her I knew that already, but her eyes were too earnest, too terrified. "I won't," I promised. Outside again, the storm swallowed me instantly. Snow swirled in manic spirals, hiding everything beyond the reach of my flashlight. I circled the porch, inspecting the tracks more thoroughly. At the far corner, the one closest to the treeline, I found something new, a scrap of paper, half frozen, curled at the edges, pinned under a layer of ice. I pried it free with numb fingers. Crude handwriting covered the page. At first glance, it looked like a child had written it. Letters uneven, slanted, malformed. But the longer I stared, the more wrong it felt, because the letters were familiar, shapes I had seen printed at the edges of reports, forms repeating in the snow, in frost, in the dirt, the attempt at a name. My name, not perfectly, not spelled right, but close. Elias. Another attempt. Elias. And then Elias. The question mark was the worst part. It was asking, trying, learning. Snowflakes landed on the paper, dissolving into wet pinpricks that distorted the ink. I felt a tremor crawl through me in a way no winter storm ever had. I looked toward the treeline. The storm muffled all sound, but I felt something watching, studying, waiting for my next mistake. I pocketed the paper and stepped back inside, sealing the door behind me. The mother approached. "Did you find anything?" I shook my head at first, but the truth pressed too hard to stay hidden. "I found handwriting," I said, "and prints." Lake, who'd arrived moments earlier after dispatch rerouted her to assist, stepped forward. "Prints like the outpost?" "Exactly like the outpost," I said. Her face paled. "Elias, what if it's not following us? What if there are more?" I opened my notebook in response, showing her Rule 5. She read it, swallowed, and whispered, "God help us." I glanced at the little girl again. She was staring at me, or rather, staring at my pocket where the letter was hidden. "You shouldn't answer it," she said softly. "It likes when you answer." I nodded, throat tight. "I know." Outside, the storm softened for one brief, unnatural moment. And in that silence, just for a heartbeat, I swore I heard something whispering from the treeline, its voice faint beneath the snow. "Try my name again," testing the shape of it. The storm eased just enough by morning for travel to be possible, though possible in the interior didn't mean safe, just not immediately suicidal. Ravik's residents gathered at their windows as Lake and I loaded the truck. The little girl watched from behind her mother's legs, eyes fixed not on me but on the treeline behind me, as if something still stood there, hidden in the thinning snowfall. When I nodded to her, she whispered something I felt more than heard. "It practices more at night." The words followed me long after we left. I pulled onto the main trail, the truck groaning against the cold. Lake rode beside me, her rifle secured upright between us. She hadn't said much since the night at the outpost. She didn't need to. The paper with my name, misspelled but improving, lay in my breast pocket, and every time the truck bumped over rough ice, I felt its edges against my chest like a bruise. "We're good at the weather station?" Lake finally asked, her voice raw. "Yes." She didn't question it. She knew as well as I did that we were out of leads, except for the symbol carved onto my windshield, the archived notes, the missing trooper from decades ago, all pointing to the same place. The abandoned weather station sat 70 miles from the nearest village, perched on the edge of the jurisdictional line, like a forgotten outpost waiting for someone foolish enough to remember it. Rumor said Trooper Haskett, the one whose last transmission chilled my blood, was last seen heading that way. The closer we drove, the more the terrain changed. Trees thinned, snow deepened, the sky darkened with an uncanny flatness, as if robbed of color rather than covered by clouds. I'd driven this way before in summer, hated it then, hated it more now. The land felt like it remembered anyone who walked it. By mid-afternoon, the station appeared, a rectangular block of dull metal half swallowed by drifts, antenna bent and leaning like a broken limb. All windows were frost glazed, but inside, a faint flicker of movement caught the light. "Is there power?" Lake asked. "There shouldn't be." We approached carefully, boots crunching through snow that seemed too deep for the limited snowfall. More movement brushed the corner of my vision, shadows against shadows. I tried the door. It resisted, then opened with a groan that echoed down empty steel corridors. Inside was colder than outside. The air carried the sharp tang of oxidized metal, and something else, something stale, like breath trapped for too long. Lake swung her flashlight beam across the walls. "This place feels wrong. Everything about last week feels wrong," I said. The main room held old instrumentation consoles, their screens dead, their buttons coated in frost. But scattered across the counters were tapes, magnetic reels, cassettes, even some digital recorders. More than a dozen. Too many for a weather station. Someone had been using this place for something else. I picked up the nearest recorder, clicked play. Static. Then, softly, "Daniel?" I froze. The voice continued, uncertain. "Daniel, come here." Lake stepped closer. "Is that Haskett?" I murmured, or something trying to be. The voice on the recording shifted, adjusting tone, breath, cadence, just like the entity had done on the riverbank, perfectly mimicking, then slightly wrong. The tape ended abruptly with a thump, as if knocked off a table. Lake swallowed. "Play another." I reached for a second recorder. This one didn't play immediately. It clicked several times, whining as the internal mechanism fought the cold. Then a voice, a woman's this time, echoed through the speaker. "Hello? Who's in there? Please answer." No background noise. No footsteps. Just a woman calling to empty rooms. But when the final seconds played, her tone changed. Flattened. "Please answer." It was repeating, looping, practicing, trying to learn whoever it had trapped here. I set the recorder down, feeling dread tighten around my ribs. It was learning before Haskett ever showed up, maybe long before. Lake ran her flashlight across the far wall. More tapes, more papers. A cot pushed against a corner, blankets piled high and stiff with frost. Whoever had last used them had left in a hurry, or had never left at all. A notebook lay on the floor, half frozen open. I knelt and pried the pages free. Haskett's handwriting filled the margins, messy, frantic. "It waits outside. Calling. Always calling." It learned my name in an hour. Now it's learning the way I breathe. Light slow it, not stop it. I swallowed hard. Rule 3. He knew it too. At the final pages, his handwriting changed, shakier, almost illegible. I read aloud. It knows my name. Now it wants my face. Lake exhaled sharply. "Elias." But before she could finish, something moved outside. A soft, deliberate crunch of snow. Then another. Lake killed her flashlight. "Don't." I whispered. It already knows we're here. The emergency lights in the ceiling flickered to life. Dim, red, pulsing like a heartbeat. The sound outside grew clearer. Measured, pacing, then knocking. 3 sharp knocks against the metal siding. Human rhythm. Lake's breath hitched audibly. I backed toward the console, barricaded the door. We shoved a metal storage cabinet against it just as another knock came, louder this time. The station groaned under the impact, dust drifting from the ceiling. The knocking shifted the window. Soft taps, rhythmic, like fingertips brushing frost. "Elias." The whisper was muffled by the metal walls, but unmistakable. Closer than it had ever been. Too close. Lake clutched her rifle. "How is it here already?" Ravik was hours away. "It isn't one," I said, heart pounding. "There's more than one, or one that moves faster than we can track." The emergency lights dimmed to a deeper red, flickering spasmodically. Shadows crawled along the walls, stretching into bent shapes with too many joints. The knocking became insistent, slow, patient, deliberate. "Elias, open the door." I pressed my back to the console, resisting the urge to answer, to acknowledge, to give it something else to imitate. Lake whispered, "Do not speak, do not respond." The knocking stopped. Silence. Then a scrape traced the outline of the door, like a finger dragging across metal. A second scrape followed. Then a third, forming a pattern. Lake whispered, "What's it doing?" I knew before the scraping finished. It was carving. The symbol. The same circle with notch I'd seen on my windshield. In the archives. In the snow. Claiming the station. Claiming us. The metal bent slightly under a new impact. Harder than knocking. Testing the structure. Testing our endurance. If it broke through, the rules wouldn't save us. No training would. No weapon would. "Back up," I whispered. Behind the inner wall. Lake and I retreated as another heavy knock struck the door, denting the metal inward. The emergency lights flickered, sputtered, then died. Darkness swallowed us. Something exhaled on the other side of the door. Not like wind, like breath, searching for a way in. And in that perfect, suffocating black, the whisper returned, closer than ever, as though it stood inches from my face. Elias! The darkness inside the weather station thickened until it felt like standing inside a living lung. Air pushing and pulling with someone else's rhythm. Lake's breath trembled beside me, fast and shallow. I forced my hand along the console wall, searching for the emergency exit hatch I glimpsed earlier. A soft knock landed against the inner wall. Not the door. This one came from the opposite side of the room. The entity had moved. Or there were two. Lake, I whispered, back away slowly. She didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the darkness, wide and unblinking. The knock came again, 3 taps in perfect human rhythm. Then, from the other side of the door, another knock answered it. My heart lurched. There's more than one. Lake choked out a breath. A metal groan reverberated overhead, the ceiling flexing under weight. Snow trickled from the seams, drifting down like cold ash. Something was climbing the station walls, or crawling across the roof, or both. I found the emergency hatch with my fingertips and twisted the locking bar. It stuck. I shoved my shoulder against it. The hatch screeched open a few inches, enough to feel the freezing wind knifing through. Lake snapped out of her fear. Go! We shoved the hatch wide and hauled ourselves through just as metal buckled behind us. I dropped into a drift nearly chest-high, snow exploding around me. Lake landed beside me, half submerged. The wind tore at us instantly, ripping warmth away like claws stripping flesh. The station shuddered. Something slammed against the outer wall with brutal force. We need to go. Lake yelled over the gale, but the sound that followed her voice was worse than the storm. My voice. Lake. Elias, stop. It drifted from the station door. No, not the door. From the roof. Lake's face twisted in terror. Move. We ran. The wind swallowed our footsteps almost as fast as we made them. The tundra yawned in every direction, flat, white, horizonless. There was no path, no shelter, no distinction between ground and sky. My limbs felt slow, wooden, as the cold sank deeper. Lake, I turned. She wasn't there. My stomach dropped. Lake! A faint silhouette appeared through the swirling snow, too far to be hers. Too still, not human. Elias? My voice again. Practiced. Nearly perfect. The silhouette tilted its head, testing how the sound carried. I stumbled backward. Forcing my legs obeyed despite the cold gnawing into my bones. The blizzard warped sound, curving it so that every direction felt wrong. Voices rose from nowhere. My name, Lake's voice, Haskett's, even the woman from the recording. None of them were real. The only real sound was the pounding of blood in my ears. Lake! I shouted again, desperate. Echoes answered from every direction at once. Not echoes. Copies. The snow beneath me shifted. A shadow moved at the edge of my vision, slipping between gusts of white like a memory trailing behind. The blizzard blurred reality. My thoughts drifted with it. Shapes formed in the snow. Faces I hadn't seen in years. Smiles long gone, voices long lost. Hypothermia played tricks on perception, on memory, on sanity. Except some hallucinations walked toward me. I forced myself forward, each step a battle. Needles of cold drove into my fingers. My lips numbed. My skin burned, then stopped burning. Not good. Something behind me whispered, stop running. My voice. I didn't turn. The elders' rules echoed through my mind like lifelines thrown into dark water. Rule 2. If you hear your own voice behind you, walk. Do not run. So I walked. Slow. Steady. The snow deepened. Or maybe I was sinking. My thoughts drifted like loose pages in the wind. A voice to my right whispered, Elias. Another to my left, come here. Ahead, a faint figure appeared, human-shaped beckoning. I blinked hard. The figure didn't vanish. It stepped closer, not walking, adjusting, as though arranging itself to appear human, but failing in tiny ways. Too smooth, Too fluid, too deliberate. I stumbled backward into a drift, snow filling my collar, cold stabbed into my spine. My breath came in shallow gasps, each one colder than the last. Hypothermia clawed deeper, slowing me, numbing me, inviting me to lie still. But lying still was death. The entity approached, its movement wrong in ways my brain refused to fully process. Then a new voice rose above the others. Not mine, not Lake's, not Haskett's. A voice I hadn't heard in 15 years. My mother. Eli, sweetheart, were you? The storm froze around me. Everything inside me rebelled at the sound. My chest tightened, breath catching in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. I hadn't heard her voice since the funeral. My memory of it had faded over the years into muted fragments. But the voice drifting through the snow now wasn't faded. It was perfect, too perfect. I forced my eyes shut. You're not her, I whispered, though the words shook. The storm carried her voice again. Soft, warm, familiar. Come here, Eli. Come to me. My throat tightened. A part of me wanted to walk toward it. A deeper instinct, the one that remembered grief and childhood and safety, ached to obey. But another part, the part that had walked the river ice, the part that had listened to the elders, the part that had watched Burrow vanish, knew the truth. The listener didn't imitate. It remembered. And that meant it had taken my voice far earlier than I realized. And now it wanted my past too. A shadow crossed my peripheral vision. I turned. The entity stood closer. Too close. The blizzard muted around us, as though sound itself bent to listen. My mother's voice drifted from the thing's direction. Not from its mouth, but from around it, like memory being played back through air instead of speakers. Eli, my little bear. My childhood nickname. Something inside me broke. I staggered backward, slipping into deeper snow. The cold swallowed my legs. My hands trembled uncontrollably. The edges of the world blurred. Hypothermia twisted everything. Vision thought time. The creature stepped closer. Close enough that I saw its shape blur, like a photo taken right before motion smears the image. It remembered my name. It remembered my breath. Now it remembered my mother. And it whispered again, perfectly, heartbreakingly. Come home, Eli. Tears froze on my cheeks. I closed my eyes and forced myself to think. Really think. Not with memory. Not with emotion. But with the only thing the creature didn't seem able to use against me. Reason. It hunts by memory, not sight. The rule formed itself. It tracked by familiarity, voice, breath, history. So I did the one thing I hadn't dared to do since this started. I stopped thinking of my name. I stopped thinking of my past. I shut the door inside my mind as forcefully as a little girl had refused her door. The world tilted. The storm roared back in. The voice faltered, just slightly, just enough. And I ran, not blindly, not aimlessly, toward the only place left that still held answers. Toward the weather logs. Toward the final recordings. Toward the truth buried in the station. If I survived long enough to reach it again. Behind me, the storm carried a final whisper. My mother's voice, soft and deadly. I can still find you, Eli. And I knew it wasn't a threat. It was a promise.